Thank you. Well, today is what would have been volume 2 of ITOE, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. Ayn Rand said that she was going to write volume 2, which would concern just what we're doing today. She was going to write volume 2, which was to cover the formation of propositions in just the way that she had covered the formation of concepts in what we have. But she never got around to that. And what I'm doing here is not a substitute for the brilliance that she would have done, but it's the best that I can do in trying to carry forward what she gave us with playing on a certain hint that she gives us. The first question to ask is obviously, what is a proposition? What is a proposition? The traditional answer to that is that a proposition is the thought behind a sentence. Kind of vague, but it gives us something. It points us in a certain direction. And that direction is to consider the relation of the thought, the proposition, to the sentence. What is that relation? Well, take the sentence, the table is brown, and der Tisch ist braun. Two different sentences, same thought, right? So that allows us very easily to distinguish the linguistic form in which the thought is stated from the thought, the proposition, the assertion, the idea behind what's being said. Hey, guess what? We just did abstraction via differentiation. Shades of last lecture. Again, there's no way for me to say, well, just look at the thought and ignore the words. You can't do that except by varying the words and leaving the thought constant, or varying the thought and leaving the word constant. I can do that for you too. My dog is some dog. My dog is some dog. Two different ideas. The same words. Or, here's another example. I am Harry Binswanger. Now suppose one of you said, I am Harry Binswanger. Same words, true in my mouth, false in your mouth. So don't try it. So the proposition is to the sentence as the concept is to the word. You're very familiar with the fact that different words can be used for the same concept, or the same word can be used for different concepts. It's the same with a proposition. So there's nothing very mysterious here. Now, Ayn Rand describes a proposition. Well, I shouldn't say that. When she writes about propositions, she refers to them as conceptual identifications. You may not have noticed this in your first 3 readings of ITOE, as I didn't, but it sounds good and it just sort of comes in, but no other philosopher would talk that way. No other philosopher would use the term conceptual identification in any context, but certainly not for a proposition. But that's our first lead into what propositions are. The other way she refers to them is as an organization of concepts. An organization of concepts. And she never refers to them the way you might think she would, as an integration of concepts. Why might that be? because she wanted to state truth, not falsehood. They're not an integration. A statement, the table is brown, is not an integration of concepts. Table is an integration of two or more perceptual tables, perceived tables. After an integration, you've got a whole that she's called blended. You've got a one substituting for the many. It's seamless. It functions as a unit. A sentence, a statement, a proposition is connected, but it's not seamless, it's not blended, it's not a single unit in the strong way that a concept is. If I say, the table is brown, you hear all the words of that. And you say, he's talking about the table, he's saying it's brown, right? So the parts remain clear as parts. But if I say table, you don't immediately break that down into memories of tables or the information about tables. Table is a unit, tables are brown, is a combination, an organization of concepts. So that's why it's not an integration. Integration is a strong word. It's a connection. It's not an integration. So if we put this together, the preceding we have as a first cut, a proposition is an organization of concepts to identify something conceptually. And what I'm going to do is push that and push that and push that. And I think it's a good illustration of how to think philosophically. To identify something, what? A subject. The subject of the proposition is what the proposition is about. And it's important to keep that in mind because it's like the entity of the proposition. So an analogy, but not a literal connection, would be that the subject of the statement is to its predicate as a thing is to its attributes. That's not quite right, but it has the primary role. It's what you're talking about. Table, microphone. Now, I can go on to say, microphone, sensitive microphone, covered microphone, bendable, microphone working, microphone expensive. I can go on to say things about it, but it's always it-centered. This is the primary of the proposition. And of course, the other part is what you're saying about it, which is called the predicate, as you know. So all propositions reduce to a subject and a predicate. But they can be very complicated linguistically. They can pack a lot into the subject side and a lot into the predicate side, such as the man that I saw standing against the old rickety building holding a copy of Atlas Shrugged turned out to be the very man that I had seen earlier in the week at the train station with a copy of the Wall Street Journal. Pretty easy to understand, but the subject is man, and the predicate is same. Man, same. It always, now you can have compounds. You can say, if it's raining, we should take our umbrella. That's a compound of two thoughts. It might be raining, and we should take our umbrella. Or more simply, the dog is on the leash, and the cat is running free. It's really two propositions. The dog is on the leash, the cat is running free, joined by an and. But at the root of it all is an S is or has some relation to P. And let's now focus in on that. Ayn Rand said in the nonfiction writing course, wage a holy war for grammar. Now, everyone thinks of grammar as a means to clarity and expression, which it certainly is. But the basis of grammar, Noam Chomsky, are you listening? The basis of grammar is metaphysics. The basis of grammar is the relation between things in different metaphysical categories. Now, I've tried to illustrate the main grammatical functions of the connectives that we have in our language here. Rex is a dog. Dog is a noun. The predicate is a noun. They're all going to be about Rex, just so you can focus on the different relationships with the subject being the same. Rex is a dog. Dog is a noun. A noun is a name for a person, a thing, a place, an entity. It's in the category of entity. So are pronouns. Rex is a dog. So what we're doing is we're placing him in a wider class of entities. Call that subsumption. That's the act that goes on in the most simple primary form of propositions. And it's signaled in English grammatically by is, a. As opposed to the next one, Rex is big. Adjective, big. Not Rex is a big. You could say Rex is a big dog, and then you would be subsuming him under dog with a little twist that you're adding in the adjective as a complexity, but you're basically subsuming Rex. But if you say Rex is big, you're not subsuming him under the big. There's no platonic form of the big which Rex can commune with or participate in, or demiurge can shape him in relationship. Rex is big is a different kind of sentence. It's a description, it's not a classification. I'm calling it here attribution. And I got onto this when I considered that book, Rex Barks, about diagramming sentences. It's a very interesting little pamphlet kind of book called Rex Barks. And I thought, holy cow, I don't have any theory of how to understand Rex Barks. I know about Rex is a dog is an animal is a living thing, a fox terrier is a dog. What do I do with Rex Barks? I can't say Rex is a Barks. How does this work? I'm calling that causation, and that may seem strange to say Rex Barks, but in the objectivist theory of causation, the causation is just this entity does that. There's a little more to it because there's another entity involved, but we're not using that. So I'm calling that causation. I don't know any word for describing what happens as attribution describes describing. Rex has a tail. Now there's a noun, but there's a has. It's not Rex is a tail. It's Rex has a tail. I'm calling that analysis. Now and then Rex is on, preposition, the couch. I'm calling that relating. The only ones I really care about the right-hand column description is subsumption and attribution. I just want to get clear that there are different kinds of relating you do between the subject and the predicate. Philosophers, such as me and everybody else, tend to think of subsumption as the only thing. But attribution is different. Maybe I should back up just to make the point. The grammar of the sentence gives you the metaphysical relationship. So when you hear somebody say, Harry is late, you don't think, oh, there's some class of entities, lates, and Harry is a member of that class. No, you get from the is and then an adjective that this is attribution. You know that you're talking about an entity possessing an attribute, or a relationship in this case, actually. If you hear Rex is bigger than Fido, the ER in English and the than are grammatical things that tell you you're comparing two things, you're relating two things. So the grammar is absolutely essential. If you didn't have that, you just had Rex dog, Rex big, Rex barks, Rex tail, Rex couch. You couldn't think. You wouldn't get the metaphysical categories right. The reason why I made the crack about Noam Chomsky is that he's famous for the really stupid thesis that universal deep grammar is innate. Because how can we explain the fact that all languages make a difference between subject and predicate and allow for predicates of different types? We can explain it because that's the way reality is. An attribute isn't an entity. A relationship isn't an entity. An action isn't an attribute or an entity or a relationship. But he says, oh, it must be innate. Must be innate. Imagine that all these different languages have subjects and predicates. Can't account for it. So to bring this together, a proposition at the bottom there, a proposition is a grammatically structured combination of concepts to identify a subject by applying a predicate. Now, that is not my final definition, but that is very close. A proposition is a grammatically structured combination. Now, you see why I make the grammar, I featured the grammar, because it's grammatical structure that distinguishes subsumption from attribution and the others. Now, the remaining question is what? Can you see what in there needs some unpacking? What word in there is a little bit too vague to be really helpful? Apply, yes, applying a predicate. What do we mean by that? And this is where we go back to the objectivist epistemology part 1, what she did tell us. And my almost final definition is a proposition is a grammatically structured combination of concepts to identify a subject by grasping that it is a unit of the predicate. It is a unit of the predicate. Now, we're going to have to modify that a little bit because Harry is late does not mean Harry is a unit of late. But it means something kind of like that, and that's where I want to go finally here. Measurement inclusion is what goes on in all forms of proposition, whether it's subsumption, attribution, whatever. So we've got from the earlier theory the scale along a CCD. We've identified the P range, which is marked off there. The P range, which has been integrated. And we see that the measurements of S fall within the P range. So we include the measurements of S, we include S because of its measurements in the range. That's what it means to say S is P, whether it says is AP or P is an adjective and it applies to S. So that gives us my final definition. A proposition is a grammatically structured combination of concepts to identify a subject by a process of measurement inclusion. Now we have to look at it a little more carefully. Look at the first one, subsumption. Because this, would I repeat that? All I did is change the last part to a process of measurement inclusion. A proposition is a grammatically structured combination of concepts to identify a subject, that's its purpose, by a process of measurement inclusion. Which, you know, a little, I'm dropping out whose measurements are included where and what. It's to identify a subject by seeing that its measurements fall within the range of measurements covered by the predicate concept. But I didn't want to say all that. But that's really what it is, to identify a subject by seeing that its measurements fall within the range of measurements that constitute the predicate's range within a CCD. Now, that doesn't answer the kind of interesting metaphysical, epistemological question about propositions. To do that, we have to break down two cases. Rex is a dog, the subsumption case, from all the others. So there are two types of propositions whose mechanics are a little different. The classificatory ones are the ones S is a P, and the P is a noun. The descriptive ones are all the others. Or put it this way, I'm putting all the others under the category descriptive. So these have different functions. When you say man is an animal versus man can darn socks. With man as an animal, you're organizing two concepts. You're showing the relationship among concepts. You're doing wiring in your brain to connect one set of neurons to another. You're kind of still above the level of concrete reality, adjusting your cognitive equipment. Oh, this file folder goes inside that file folder. You know, there are these hanging file folders that hold, if you remember paper. You remember paper? It comes from a tree. You put the papers in the manila file, and then you put the manila file in a pendaflex or a hanging thing, which holds 4 or 5 of those. That's what you're doing. You're organizing your files. You're relating them to each other when you subsume. But more this worldly, more getting to the purpose of propositions is when you describe. There you're not subsuming, connecting one concept to another. You're saying something about the thing that's the subject. You're saying something about the thing that is the subject. You're describing it. And the question is, what is the basis of that? What are the mechanics of a descriptive proposition? So classificatory is S is A, P, and descriptive is all the other. It has the attribute P, performs the action P, has relation P to Q, and there are probably others. I worked on this problem in the 80s and filled a notebook with ideas. And I didn't get it. Or rather, I got it, but I said, nah. Remember that old Steve Martin routine? I know, why don't we have a jury of 12 men to decide issues of law? And they will apply impartial principles to judge the facts and nothing but the facts and reach a conclusion that way. Nah. I had this idea, and nah, that doesn't work. Then when I got working on my book, I talked to Greg Salmieri, and he said, that's the answer. I mean, he didn't know I had discarded arrow. He said, the way it works is this. And my God, that's what I threw away. So all credit goes to Greg, but I want a little footnote saying, I was smart enough to come up with this, but stupid enough to reject it. Greg pointed out that a statement like S has the attribute P is about, it does to the attribute what subsumption does to the subject in a classificatory statement. So when you say Rex is big, you're saying Rex's size is a big size. When you say Rex barks, you're saying Rex's action is an action of barking. So you're still subsuming, but you're subsuming the predicate condition under the concept for that type of predicate condition. So there's subsumption going on in both cases, but in the case of descriptive, the purpose is not to form a connection among your files, but to identify the subject by conceptually naming the attribute that it has. So you could say Rex is doing that. But when you say Rex is barking, you're simply putting that under your pre-existing concept of barking. So it is still a measurement inclusion operation, and that's what is so helpful with this. You're still seeing something falling under in the P range, but it's not the whole S. It's an attribute of S, or an action of S, or an attribute of S in relation to Q. So you're not classifying or subsuming the whole. You're classifying or subsuming a part of the whole. Now, going back to this, I was a little worried. I came to this, there are two kinds of propositions, from thinking about the difference between Rex is a dog and Rex barks. And I got a little uneasy because I thought, there's nothing in objectivism that talks about classificatory and descriptive, subsumption versus attribution. There's nothing in the literature. Am I making some kind of artificial distinction here? This kind of raises warning flags of false dichotomy, of artificial distinctions, unnecessary concept. And then I soothed myself by realizing that Aristotle, in the very beginning of his collected works, makes this exact distinction. He says, there are two kinds of statements: those that say something is of something, and those that talk about what's in something. In other words, we say Socrates is a man, we're saying man of Socrates in the Greek way of looking at it. When we say Socrates knows grammar, as they put it, Socrates is grammatical, we're talking about what's in. And Aristotle even says in, but not as a part. In, but not as a part is exactly what Ayn Rand said when she says an attribute is an inseparable aspect of a thing. A part is what can be separated. So he's making the attribute part distinction, just like she did. But maybe she got it from him. She well could have gotten it from him, because I'm sure that comes through the centuries into the Thomist tradition, which she was familiar with. So there is precedent for making this kind of division, and I think it's necessary because there just are two different kinds of things: putting a file in another file and describing a concrete or a relative concrete. What about negative propositions? Because that covers positive propositions. That's it. You classify either the whole entity or an aspect of an entity in the predicate's range of measurements. What about negative propositions? Well, that's pretty obvious. The range outside of P we'll call non-P, and when you say S isn't P, you're saying its measurements fall outside that range of P. Now, there's a very deep metaphysical issue going on here. So what looks like yeah, actually refers to something of amazing profundity and depth. Only I don't know what it is. No, I'm going to tell you. There's no non-being, right? Not only does non-existence not non-exist or exist, there's no, and Ayn Rand says this in the workshops, there's no concept of non-existence. You can have a concept of limited relative non-existence, such as George Washington is non-existent now. But non-being, non-existence, those are meaningless terms. Meaningless, it's just like I said, non-glapapa. It has no referent, it has no meaning, it is an invalid conjunction of non with existence. So that kind of takes care, if you really grasp that and why it's true, it takes care of questions like what's between the atoms, does the Big Bang mean that the universe is expanding? What happens when you get to the edge of the universe and you want to go further? There is no edge of the universe. There is no space between the atoms. There is no empty space anywhere. The universe cannot expand. The universe is finite. All that there is what there is. Now, you can ask about that in the question period because half of you are completely upset by that, and kind of understandably so, and I can go over that. But what is there which not being P is? It's being something different from P. There is that. There isn't the non-existence of P-ness, but there is being non-P. Being non-P means being something else. Now, who do you think discovered this? Wrong. It was Plato. It was Plato. You would think it'd be Aristotle. No, it was Plato. Plato has in the Sophist, I believe, that there is no non-being, but there is otherness. Or as we put it, it's different. So to not be P is to be something else. To not be red is to be some other color. Now, maybe some of you think, well, what about Saturday is non-red? It's not some other color. The square root of 2 is non-red. Is not red, but it's not green. It's not any color. Those statements are invalid. There is no valid statement, Saturday is not red, which is why people don't make them outside of logic classes. A differentiation requires a CCD. The fact that something is not P is not by itself a warrant for ascribing to it falls in the same category with everything else that doesn't even have the same conceptual common denominator. Difference is different from disparateness, is the way I put it. Saturday and red are incommensurable. They're disparate. It's not that Saturday is different from red. It doesn't relate to red. There's no conceptual common denominator. The only purpose of saying A isn't B is to differentiate where there's a conceptual common denominator. Okay? Noam Chomsky isn't right. Okay? because the conceptual common denominator of right and wrong, true and false, apply to the theories of the person. But Noam Chomsky is not a prime number, is not a meaningful statement. There's no facts of reality that give rise to the point of making that statement. So if you drop the idea that non-P includes everything, every possible combination of things in the universe that S isn't, when you say S isn't P, you get this diagram, which is a meaningful, important, crucial diagram. And it prevents you from reifying zero, as Ayn Rand calls it, and treating non-being as if it were an attribute or a kind of being or a place or something, or even using that concept. There is no concept non-being. Now we come to the really cash value part of it. The whole point of this discussion of propositions is to get rid of Platonism and to have an Aristotelian perspective on the whole conceptual level. And here it comes. Concepts are the means. Propositions are the end. Concepts are tools that live to be used in propositions. Aside from their use in propositions, concepts are worthless. Now, we love concepts, and we're constantly saying concepts are what you have to look at. You have to have a theory of concepts. Science progresses by forming the concept that gives a green light to induction. Concepts, concept, concepts. Yeah, but the concepts are the producer's goods. They're like the factories, the machinery. What we want is the car that comes out at the end, the consumer good. Propositions are the raison d'etre of concepts. And even propositions themselves are only means. Propositions are the means to life, to knowing how to treat something. That dog is dangerous. Oh, I should keep away from him, right? A truss can be combined with an arch. Reardon's thought. Existence is identity. It doesn't matter what the proposition is. It's for the purpose of dealing with reality, or it's a non-proposition. Ayn Rand, in terms of the function of a proposition, made an intriguing statement. She said, the function of a proposition is like that of an equation. And just to sell you on the need for careful reading, I read that many, many times, and I took it to be a proposition is like an equation. So how, the natural thought, well, S is P, you replace it with S equals P, and how does that work out? But that's not what she said. She said the function of a proposition is like the function of an equation. So what is the function of an equation? Well, this showed that the two things are equal. No, not really. So here's an equation. 6 divided by 3 is 2. Now, why is 2 the answer rather than 6 plus 3 equals 10 minus 8, or 6 divided by 3, equal to 10 minus 8, or 6 divided by 3 equals 12 squared divided by 8 times 9. So 144 divided by 72 is 2. Why is 2 the answer? All those other things are true. They're true equations. But there's a privileged state to the first one. 6 divided by 3 is 2. Why? Because of psychoepistemology. Because of the crow, because of the reason why we need concepts, because what concepts do, because of what propositions do with concepts. We need to reduce all equations to one number at the end, if possible. That's the ideal, because then we can store the relationship we've discovered in the concept for that number. So 6 divided by 3 equals 2 says, oh, 6 divided by 3 is the same as the number of fingers I'm holding up now. It's this, everything I know about 2 applies to 6 divided by 3. So 2 is the central repository for all the facts about 2. That is, the symbol 2 is a concept that stores everything you know about other relationships that reduce to 2. But you don't have a file folder for 10 minus 8. So the second one there, 6 plus 3, 6 divided by 3 equals 10 minus 8. Yeah, it's true, but where do you go from that? Where do I store that? What good is that to me? Now, there can be occasions, yeah, I'm not saying there's something wrong with this. There are occasions where you want to equate two relationships. But basically, what you want to know when you solve an equation is what number does it reduce to? Or if it's a variable, what one variable? Because the numbers are nodes in the network. The numbers are files. The numbers are concepts. But expressions, these things are directions to perform operations. Expressions, they're called. They're not numbers. You don't have files for them unless they're very, very special operations that you perform all the time. So what's going on in the function of an equation is that it stores facts about a number. It adds to the information content of a concept. And that's what concepts do, and that's what propositions do. So here's the whole thing. Now, this is the whole course, the whole 5 lectures in one diagram. It kind of looks like a dog. That's convenient. So go down to the bottom here. You got 2 perceived concretes, Rex and Lassie. You integrate them into a concept. That's the concept dog. You store in the concept not Rex and Lassie, but knowledge about Rex and Lassie, which you hope is applicable to the new dog you encounter. And the proposition is the application of the knowledge stored in the concept. So when you say, hey, this is a dog, so what I know about dogs, I can download onto this new dog. Now, one of them may be wrong. See, dogs are friendly. I have that up there. Maybe this new dog isn't friendly. Doesn't matter. The purpose of the concept is to summarize the information, condense, store, and make retrievable the information that you learned from these 2 cases and others. And as you find, oh, this new dog doesn't like to be petted and is trying to bite me, you change this. Some dogs are friendly and like to be petted. Some dogs don't. And you try to understand what kind of dog is one or the other and how to know which it is. Doesn't matter. Doesn't shatter anything when you have some information that needs qualification or even tossing out. This is the function. This is the whole thing. Facts get stored in concepts to be applied to new concretes, from which you presumably then learn other things that get stored in the concept. So this concept grows and grows and grows as your knowledge grows. The flow of information in a proposition, the flow of information is from the predicate, dog, to the subject. To me, that was the thing that really was enlightening. The proposition is like a pipe that lets information gained here flow over to there. That's why you want it. So that when you see the next instance of something you've conceptualized before, you can apply the knowledge that you gained upward to downward, to the new concrete, to the new case. That's what it means to learn from experience. That's the function of concepts and of propositions. All together, they all work together. There's only one little issue that puzzled me that remains, is easier to resolve. Well, these things are propositions inside here. How did they get in there? Because I've said the proposition is the downloading of information from a concept, so it goes this way. How do we get really things into there? Propositional things. It's easy to see how you could get the image of Rex and the image of Lassie stored as a memory. But how do we get propositions? Because my theory says propositions are already presuppose that there's content. And then I realized you have a higher order proposition. You have a proposition, dogs bark. You make this be the subject of a higher order proposition. See, when you went from here to here, you're saying these two belong together. I'm going to call them dogs. So you don't have propositional knowledge yet in dogs. You have to look at Rex and look at Lassie and say, oh, dogs bark. Subject? Dogs. Not Rex, not Lassie. The subject there is dogs, right? So you store under dogs that they bark. That's a kind of subsumption of the action. That gives you the content that then you can apply to reality, to the concretes, when you pipe it down to the next dog you see. I was shocked and reoriented by picking up Atlas Shrugged. I wanted examples of propositions when I was first thinking about that. I said, well, let me get some examples of propositions here. I'm not working too much in my head. Let me open a book and point at random and see what kind of propositions there are. And of course, Atlas Shrugged is a highly philosophical novel, right? I kept pointing to concretes. Dagny opened the car and began walking at a fast pace. Galt looked at her. Francisco said, "Our brother, where did you get sick?" You know, there was sentence after sentence in this philosophical novel was about concretes. And that's true of almost every book you pick up and almost every sentence you say. Not all, or we'd be in trouble, but 90% of the sentences that you say, and probably 99% for most people, the subject is a concrete, and you're applying simple concepts to that concrete. It's time for lunch, not animals are living organisms, not actions have consequences. We say those things on occasion, but most of the work that is done by propositions is to talk about what's real. Reality is the concretes, right? And that's where I began to reorient myself. I've been thinking only going up. Well, we form concepts, we form wider concepts. We have propositions that relate concepts to each other. We have inductive propositions. All men are mortal. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We have these wonderful, and I forgot reality. That's the purpose of everything. That's the purpose, is to know to get up and go to lunch, or to know to buy this stock and not that stock, or at least to know that it's probable you should buy this stock and not that stock. To engage in this action, not that action. To not act on the spur of the moment, you need to know what you are doing, who you are, where you are, what you're doing, all that to apply down to your life, to what you do in the next 5 seconds, right? You have a choice. You can listen or tune out, for example. So you have this theory, this wonderful theory. Volition comes down to man's power to focus his mind. What's the point of that? To know, hey, I should be paying attention. I should be in focus now. I'm drifting. Come to. The whole purpose of concepts, theories, principles, propositions is to guide your action in concrete reality now and in every succeeding moment of your life. So I think we are, I have 51 minutes, and that's kind of the Aristotelian overview that I'm supplying. And so I will stop here and take questions. Can I see, some of you find this last part a little paradigm shifty? Could you raise your hands? Oh, good. It's not just me. You know, we spend so much time talking about principles and theories and inductions and high intellectual abstract things, which are so important, right? Yeah, but they're important because they tell us what to do now in concrete reality. That's hard for a philosopher to get. Yes?
Well, I totally agree. That was very paradigm shifting. It was brilliantly explained, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Very good. My question is, when do you know non-P and not P can be treated as the same, and when do they not equate?
Non-P and not P always equate if you're not playing games. That is, if you speak rationally based on reality, you do not say either triangles are not angry or triangles are non-angry. You don't say either one of those. If it somehow came up, you'd say triangles are not the kind of entity capable of any living, let alone conscious action, so the question does not arise. So you can say triangles are not the kinds of things that get angry or don't get angry, that have the possibility of anger. You can say that, but you would never say triangles are non-angry or triangles are not angry. You would never say that. So they're exactly equivalent. Non and not are exactly equivalent. To not be A, you have to be something else. Not to be anything is not to be. Yes?
Okay, this is going back to your prior lecture on hierarchy. Last night in the discussion, Fleming Rose said that we have to find a balance between freedom and tolerance. Steve Simpson said we have to recapture the idea of individual rights. And it occurred to me that freedom and tolerance are really derivatives and subsets of individual rights, and that, as Steve said, tolerance is too fuzzy a concept
Yes.
That's part of the problem. I
Yes,
wanted your
it's a
thoughts on
hierarchy
that
problem.
hierarchy.
Yeah, it's a hierarchy problem. You have to ask what facts of reality give rise to the need for such a term as tolerance. And I only know of one valid fact, which is governments have persecuted people for their ideas. So tolerance began probably with John Locke. I mean, he's popularized it, letters concerning toleration. And the idea was Catholics should not go out and slaughter Protestants because they're Protestant. I mean, they probably have a lot of other good reasons to slaughter people, but just not because they're Protestant. Little philosopher's humor there. Protestants should not initiate force against Jews. Jews should not initiate force against atheists. So toleration meant the fact that a person has and expresses and acts on different ideas per se is no justification for using force against him. That's what you have to tolerate it in the sense of put up with it. I don't like the fact that he worships the wrong God. But he hasn't done anything to me, so I can't do anything to him. That's what tolerance means historically. Now we have the concept of freedom of speech, so we don't need toleration. I don't know that there's any purpose for the concept now. So there's no tension between freedom and toleration any more than there is between freedom in government or freedom in law or freedom in rights. There is just, you cannot initiate force against a person, and his uttering ideas, believing ideas, or whatever is not force against you, so you're using force against him would be initiation. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, the fact that my neighbor believes there are no gods or 20 gods neither breaks my leg nor picks my pocket. Brilliant. That's the issue. Yes?
Can you go more into depth as to whether or not words like the and is and so are concepts? And if they're not concepts, what are they?
Words like what?
Like the and is.
The. Yeah, I think they're concepts and is, but they're concepts that are directions to consciousness. Take and. And I formulate this a little bit differently from Ayn Rand, and I think that we're saying the same thing. And is an instruction to consciousness, to join two thoughts. Bob went to the store and he bought a loaf of bread. Join the thoughts, went to the store, bought a loaf of bread. The is a way of indicating a couple of things. It can be a definite description. The wallet I left on my dresser, meaning consider that one under that description. There is some one thing under that description that meets that description, and I'm talking about it and not anything else. Not wallets left on desks, but the wallet that I left on my desk last night. So it's an instruction to consciousness. It's a conceptual instruction to conscious, but it's not a concept of relating to the external world. It's a concept relating to an action of consciousness. Do I have time for one more? No. We've reached the end, but we'll have a whole class of questions tomorrow.